Well, good morning and a happy St. Patrick's Day. When your name is Ryan, this day is important to you. I'll be eating corned beef and cabbage and dancing an Irish jig later today. Well, maybe not the Irish jig. Thanks for joining us. You know, we're all consumers. We all need to buy a variety of things almost every day. The way we do that has changed a lot in recent years. We're going to talk about that and more starting right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, the recent announcement that many of the Shopko stores in the Upper Peninsula and elsewhere will be closing really brought home the fact that the retail landscape is changing rapidly. That issue, coupled with the cost of prescription drugs, are clearly among the key issues that affect much of the population here and elsewhere. Our guest this morning is someone who's well versed on those issues. He started his career working for Shopko and left the company to start his own group of pharmacies in the Upper Peninsula. He's also a partner in a major Marquette building project. Our guest this morning is Ron Caters, CEO of MK Stores, which operates the Snyder drugstore chain in Upper Michigan. Ron, welcome back to the Ryan Report.
Yeah, welcome.
Nice to have you with us. We talked a little about your background the last time you were here, but as a young college graduate, you actually started your career with Shopko, didn't
Absolutely. They came down to the UW in Madison and recruited people and had a good story. And we're going to expand rapidly and you're going to move up and all this stuff kids like to hear, you know.
Right.
And went to work with them right out of school.
And you actually were here when the Marquette store opened.
Absolutely. If my recollection is we opened November 13th, 1969.
So we just missed the 50th anniversary.
Just missed the 50th.
By a couple of days.
It's too bad.
It's quite a change. Before we get into what's happening today, let's look at that history a little bit. You know, really Shopko at that time was one of the major players in that field, weren't they?
Absolutely. You know, when I was in that store and even later in Kingsford, I mean, 27, 30 registers open.
Wow.
I mean, not a ton of big box competition, so it's kind of a new concept. And they're very successful.
The Walmarts and Targets were also smaller at that point, weren't they?
Right. I can remember back in those days that Walmart was about the same size as Shopko, a little bit bigger. They had like 50 stores and Shopko had like 30, 35.
Yeah.
And they actually had a consortium where they would meet and go around to each other's company and try to get tips. So I did meet Sam Walton once in Shopko in Green Bay.
Interesting. You know, the thing is, Shopko really revolutionized retailing in Marquette. Is that a fair statement, would you say? Not just in Marquette, but everywhere.
Certainly in those days or in the earlier years, sure. Mm-hmm.
What was the appeal? So many things under one roof?
Pretty much. Large assortment, out of sort everybody. And the second thing is you shave the prices a little bit. Mostly I think the draw was the assortment. You know, everything under one roof, health and beauty aids, hardware, apparel, sporting goods. I mean, toys, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody had toys like they had.
It was so different in those days for those who don't remember, and I know you do, but you know, there were a lot of great stores, but they would feature toys or clothing or whatever it might be, and here was this store that brought it all under one roof.
Correct. A lot of smaller.
And they certainly changed everything in retailing.
Sure.
So what went wrong? What happened? Why are we facing what we're facing today?
Well, I think there's several things the company did in thinking about it. One of the things they did is originally they owned all their own real estate. They owned all the stores, and they eventually got onto the New York Stock Exchange, and the profit levels were okay, but not real extreme. And the big market, you know, punishes you there. And when that stock dropped a little bit under $10 a share, the money guys bought them. So they got purchased by a company called Sun Capital Partners from Boca Raton, Florida. And the first thing they did is sold all the real estate and then made the stores, lease them all back. So the rent at, for example, the Marquette store is much higher. We own the building, meaning Shopko owned the building for many years. Now all of a sudden you're paying big rent. So in a sense, that's another huge expense. The next thing they did is borrowed money against the company to a certain extent. Bottom line is the $1 billion they put in the company, they got out in a hurry. And the company's saddled with debt. Retail doesn't behave very well with a lot of debt. There's just too much activity and too much variability in margins and profits. So that's a burden they had to drag forward.
You know, and this kind of situation you're talking about is not just with Shopko, is it? Many of the major retailers have gone through the same kind of exercise. In fact, some are still doing it today.
Absolutely. Some are very strong and they got big enough, fast enough, and things like that. But virtually none of these, certainly in Upper Michigan, none of these chain stores, they don't own their buildings. They don't own their real estate. It's all owned by somebody else, third parties, and they pay rent.
Okay. So you know, these investment firms really generally have no history in retail. I mean, they're mainly involved in investments. And you know, do they have the necessary passion and vision to make those things work?
They don't want to make the investment, is what's the matter. Sometimes in everybody's life, you know, an investment is a long-term payoff. They're not willing to do the long-term. That's a challenge. And some of them are bean counters. I mean, they're very good at the numbers and very good at marketing, things like that, but they don't really know the inside out of the business, I don't believe.
2 or 3 years ago, Shopko decided to go with their Shopko hometown brand store, somewhat smaller. And the CEO at that time said this was the new strategy for the company. Was that a good idea, and is it working at all?
I think the strategy was okay, and the idea was not to go where everybody, the big guys are. But in a lot of cases, the big guys came to them and they're trapped there for the main line, the large stores. So these hometown stores came from a purchase of, I believe, a couple hundred Pamida stores. And those guys were undercapitalized and under-inventoried and in a lot of rural locations. And Shopko had to put money, a lot of times money they didn't have, into making those a little better. I think the strategy was right, but then you start carrying forward a lot of debt and you have debt problems.
Okay.
I mean, they owe big money, had a big loss carry forward here.
We'll talk more about Shopko and some other things as well. Back with more on the Ryan Report just 2 minutes from now. Our guest this morning is Ron Caters. Ron runs the MK stores, the Snyder drugstore chain, and a couple of other drugstores in the UP.
Sure.
But Ron did spend a lot of time with the Shopko early in his career.
Sure.
I guess the big question is, will Shopko itself survive?
I think it's pretty doubtful. Rumor mill within the company right now is if they don't find a buyer by March 15th, which is, you know, a few days ago now, they're not going to be around. We'll see what happens.
And that buyer will probably do other things that aren't in the best interest of the long-term interest of the chain.
It all depends. Who knows?
You never know, I
Who
guess.
knows?
You know, you still meet a lot of people who say, I love the Shopko store in Marquette, you know, and yet it's closing. Was the store doing that badly?
Actually, the store was doing okay, and my understanding from people in the company is that most of the stores in UPs were profitable. Only 1 or 2, if that, were not making money. So that part of it's kind of sad, I guess. I mean, what are we supposed to do as customers and as workers here, right? So that's kind of what happened. But they lost a lot of money. They've been losing a lot of money out west and a lot of different communities. This Pamida chain that they purchased and now made them Shopko hometowns. The strategy's good, but I think there was too much fix up for them there, and in some communities they weren't doing that well, but they still owned them.
What about retail in general? You know, you've been a retailer your whole career. We see malls are falling out of favor.
Sure.
One time the Marquette Mall and Westwood Mall were both booming places.
Sure.
But that's happening all over the country. What is this a cultural change we're going through?
It's some of each. Part of it has to do with the internet and communications and social media, but the big, certainly the big player is Amazon.
Right.
And Walmart's actually all out struggling, and I think they're going to make it on that in the digital space. So what's going on is you have an increasing share of the business is going online. Most retailers don't make enough money, contrary to popular belief, to go down 10 or 12 or 15% in sales that go over to the online business. They can't afford to do that.
Okay.
And that puts the pressure on them. Then one thing leads to another. And pretty soon you've got several big empty malls everywhere, and things like that.
You know, as we look though at even the internet, like Amazon has now been buying some brick and mortar stores, and there's
Sure.
some rumors that maybe they should take over Target. And Walmart, on the other hand, is developing. You know, they have strong brick and mortar, but now they're developing internet.
Sure.
So is that kind of the future, or do we really know?
I think it's some of each. I think people as a hobby or as a personal endeavor want to kind of see and feel what they're buying.
Right.
A lot of people don't want to buy things online, get it doesn't fit, especially in the apparel area, or other things. Other things they do. It's cut and dried. I mean, if it's a brand name television that's, $100 cheaper, you're just going to get it. Comes in, sure enough,
Yeah.
everything you expected.
Right.
But many times it's not quite that way, and there's a little delay.
Let's shift gears. You're in the pharmacy business.
Sure.
Have been for many years.
Sure.
We have strong mail order pharmacy now. We
Yep.
have big box stores. We have big drug chains.
Everybody.
Is there a future for the small town independent pharmacy?
I think to a certain level, mostly because half of the prescription business is kind of for acute prescriptions, meaning you just went to the doctor and you have this pain or you have this injury, you went to the emergency room, and the doc says, you're not going to sleep unless you get a little relief here or unless you take this or do that. And so half of that business will generally stay local. It's a little bit like the restaurant business, I suppose. You can order food online, but really, you're not going to get most of it.
It's not the
you know.
same.
So there's a little bit of the nature of that business. The challenge in that business, the prescription end of the business, is the government and insurance companies. That's the challenge.
We hear a lot of talk in Washington about drug costs. Do you think we'll see any change or any developments there?
I think you'll see a little bit. I think the push toward transparency with the middlemen, the pharmacy benefit managers, and the insurance companies is important, so people see what's really happening with the prices of drugs. The other side is there's not going to be, I don't believe, significant savings because the high-priced drugs all have patents, and all the other generic drugs, actually in Marquette County and all of the upper Michigan. Probably 88% of all the prescriptions are generic, and there's a huge competitive battle going on there. Yet the ones that gain attention, you walk in, you get $1,000 prescription, people go ballistic,
Yes, I bet.
and for good reason.
Okay. We'll talk more about drugs and other things in just a couple of minutes. Back
Sure.
with more on the Ryan Report after we take one more break. Again, our guest this morning is Ron Caters. Before we leave the drug issue, Ron, I know, and obviously these prices are all controlled by the pharmaceutical companies, not by the individual pharmacies, whoever they are. But one of the issues we hear a lot about is the drugs are more expensive in this country than elsewhere.
That's correct.
Is that something that may change or may be forced to change? Or?
It may be forced to change to a certain degree. And mostly we're talking about brand or patented medications. The drug companies are smart enough to know that they can only charge what they can get. If you go to a third world country and those people can only afford $25 for the most expensive prescription, that's all they can get. So they're faced with the choice of we do no business in this country or we sell it for $25. Because the actual production costs of medication, certainly a lot of oral solids, is low, $1 or $2 a prescription. They can do that, and they price all over the world that way. Now, why don't we get a little bit more margin or money from places like Northern Europe, where people are pretty well off, and why does the United States have to bear all that cost? I think that's wrong, and I think they should do those sorts of things with developed countries. But with undeveloped countries that need this medication, they don't have the money, they'll never have the money. What are you going to do?
Okay. And the drug companies rationalize what they're doing, saying put so much into research, which is legitimate,
A lot of it is.
but they're not spreading it over all the customers. are
That's
they?
correct.
Right.
And so, the government or legislators, they have a point here.
Okay. One more subject area. You're a partner in the new development, One Marquette Place, down by
Correct.
the Ordock and
Correct.
Founders Landing. Mixed-use project, I think is how you describe it generally. A lot of apartments. And, is the construction complete?
No, they're still working on the 4th and 5th floor of the main apartment building there, but they're just doing interior work. They should be done here in the next 30 days or so.
Okay. Have you decided yet what the commercial developments will be on the, I guess, the ground floor?
Well, we're going to put a restaurant in the one unit in the apartment building, and we're looking at some units across the way there between us and the Hampton Inn, and that will be more commercial.
Okay.
We've got a couple guys that are in. We want to kind of condoize it and sell the units, but all of those projects you have to sell half of it before you can start building.
Right.
So I mean that's a long pull a little bit.
Now,
It's never cheap. You're not right down by the lake. You're right by the lake.
Right. I know you decided to go with apartment rentals, and I know Viridia's done the same thing with one of their big projects. You obviously saw a need here as opposed to all the condos that have been developed.
There generally is not only an underlying trend, there is a need. I mean, the state, MSHDA, and several other MEDC have done surveys. And a few years ago, they did one, and the real void in the marketplace in Marquette, believe it or not, is better apartments.
Okay.
It's on two ends, like a dumbbell. They want nicer ones, and then affordable housing is always a problem. The problem is how do you make a brand new nice place and charge $400 a month for rent? You can't do it.
Right.
It's not in the dollar cards. So those are two areas that there's a space. Now you say, well, what about some of the other smaller communities surrounding Marquette? Could you do that there? That answer is no, because it doesn't look like that way in the survey. You build a nice place, and this One Marquette Place is a beautiful establishment. I mean, I have to say so myself, but
Right.
and it's nice, underground heated garage. The last month, that's the thing all the tenants are loving.
Right.
They go, I can't believe how nice this is. Things like
Built
that.
in a lot of amenities. I think you
Right,
have
and it costs money.
You have a
then. So
rooftop
party room and stuff. Yeah,
and
we're
something
going to
on the
have all
ground
that.
floor as well.
Yeah, and that raises the price. You can't do that for nothing.
I think I saw where the rentals could go up to $2,000-3,000 a month.
A couple of them.
Okay.
Pretty nice views, though. I
Okay.
have to be honest with you.
Okay.
Overlooks the whole city or the whole harbor area. Plus, you're right on the lake,
And
right on the bike path.
How are you doing with the rentals?
Pretty good, I think. I mean, the construction's been slow, so that's our rub right now. But it's intricate. Gunlock Champion's doing it, and they do very much quality work. We like that.
Is this your first foray into housing and this kind of job?
On this kind of scale, my partner Barry Polzin and I, is certainly true. I've owned small apartments, buildings off and on. I owned a 10-unit in Iron Mountain once that we built, and a few things. It's work.
But this is a major step.
Well, it is,
Yeah.
but it's okay. I mean, there's a need, and we can do it, and we hope it'll all go fine. It's always a risk.
Okay. Well, best of luck with that.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming in this morning to talk with us.
Sure.
I'll have some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on the Ryan Report after this break. Well, part of our conversation this morning was about prescription drugs, which got me thinking about how many drug companies use television advertising to tell the public about the benefits their products provide. I'm sure you've seen the television commercials. There are a lot of them for different medical issues, and they all tell a wonderful story describing what the drug does in fighting the problem they have been created to deal with. And it sounds great until they go on to describe the potential side effects that users could experience, which include a lot of very unpleasant things, including death. The warnings are sometimes so lengthy and serious, they almost sound like a commercial that was intended to discourage you from trying that drug. Nevertheless, it must work because they spend millions of dollars on television to tell you about these drugs every year. Anyway, that got me thinking, what if the same standards applied to other advertisers and they had to tell you about the negatives of their products? For example, what if a commercial for a car manufacturer told you all about the great things their car has to offer, like the outstanding mileage or the high-tech features. And after that, they had to follow it up with, drivers are reminded, if you drive our car beyond the posted speed limit or inappropriately for conditions, you may be ticketed by a law enforcement agency. Further, if you fail to stop when approaching another vehicle from the rear and collide, you could do serious damage to both vehicles. And if your car leaves the road and runs into a tree, you could be seriously injured. That would be a whole new approach to car advertising that just wouldn't work. And finally, on the subject of television commercials, one that drew a lot of attention in this year's Super Bowl was for Bud Light. You might remember it was a commercial where they told us Bud Light didn't use corn syrup, while two of their major competitors do. The commercial was clever, well done, and must have been very expensive to produce, but it left a lot of beer drinkers scratching their heads. Corn syrup used in brewing? Why should I care, one way or the other? I do know the commercial upset some farmers who grow corn. I was listening to a discussion on one of the cable business channels and heard a reporter talking about the commercial and some of the tweets he had read. Some were supporting Bud Light, others like their competitors, while one cynical tweeter said it makes no difference, they all taste lousy anyway. Bud Light has also been running another commercial, this one proclaiming that the brewer will now be listing the ingredients in the beer on their package. Now, I grant you, someone might find that they would be interested in that, but I've never met a beer drinker yet that said, I wonder what the ingredients are in my beer. Like anything else, television advertising keeps changing. We've come a long way from the days when Mr. Whipple was telling customers, please don't squeeze the Charmin. I'll be back in a minute. Well, that's our show for this week. Keep in mind, if you want to watch any past episodes, they are available at uppermichigansource.com. Today's show will be available starting tomorrow afternoon. Thanks to Ron Caters for joining us this morning to provide some insights into the changing world of retail. Have a great St. Patrick's Day, and thank you for being here. Hope you'll join us again next Sunday morning.